British Columbia Hollow. Owen Durand, British Columbia Backwoods, 1983. Solitude was my cathedral, a sanctuary carved from the raw silence of the wild. My name is Owen Durand, and in the spring of 1983, I staked my claim deep in British Columbia's backwoods. A rough-hewn cabin on 5 acres of untamed forest, its logs weathered to a dull gray, its tin roof a drum for the rain's relentless beat. I wasn't running from a shadowed past or a broken life. After 10 years welding steel up and down the western coast, torch in hand, sparks biting my skin under a sky perpetually bruised, I hungered for quiet, a simplicity that civilization's clamor had long drowned out. The cabin was no palace. A sagging cot with a wool blanket stiff from disuse, a wood stove that coughed black smoke into the cramped air, a single window smudged with years of grime offering a view of pines stretching into an endless, whispering sea. A fishing pole leaned against the wall, its line coiled like a promise of sustenance. 2 rifles hung above the door, their barrels cold and reassuring. A dented kettle sat on a rickety table beside a tin of coffee and a duty log I'd started more out of habit than necessity. Supplies came from town, a half-day's trek through mud and root, but I'd always been the sort who thrived alone. Some called me a loner, I called it self-reliance. The forest embraced me those first weeks, its rhythms a balm. Wind threading the pines with a low moan, the chatter of squirrels, the distant splash of trout in a creek I'd named for no one but myself. I'd rise with the sun, its weak rays piercing the canopy to paint the cabin floor in shifting gold, and spend my days splitting wood, the axe's thud a steady pulse against the stillness. Evenings found me on the porch, a beer warming in my grip, the air sharp with sap and earth, watching dusk bleed the sky purple. Peace was a tangible thing then, a weight I could hold until mid-June stripped it bare. Midnight unfurled a sound that didn't belong, a guttural rumble, deep and deliberate, rolling from the woods like the breath of something vast and unseen. I jolted awake, sweat slicking my neck despite the night's chill, the cot creaking beneath me as I strained to parse it. Bears I knew, their heavy shuffle, their snuffling grunts, but this was no bear. Coyotes yipped in packs, sharp and fleeting. This was singular, resonant, a note held too long in the dark. I stumbled to the window, breath fogging the glass, peering into a blackness so thick it pressed against my eyes. Nothing moved, no glint of fur or gleam of eyes, just the pines swaying faintly, their needles catching the faintest starlight. I rode it off, whined through the trees, a branch groaning under its own weight, and crawled back to bed, the lie fragile but enough to coax sleep. Morning offered no clarity. I trekked miles out, boots sinking into damp loam, searching for evidence. A den, a claw mark, a tuft of hair snagged on bark. The forest mocked me with its emptiness. No tracks marred the earth, no scat dotted the underbrush, not a twig snapped to hint at passage. The air carried only pine and moss, no musk of predator or rot of prey. I returned, axe in hand, splitting wood with a vigor born of unease, the sound a frail shield against memory. But the next night, it came again. Closer, sharper, a rumble that vibrated through the cabin's bones, rattling the kettle on its shelf. I sat up, heart thudding, and grabbed a rifle, its stock a cold anchor against my palm. The porch boards creaked as I stepped out, lantern casting a trembling circle of light, but the dark swallowed it whole. The sound circled slow, deliberate, a predator's tread just beyond reach, neither beast nor man, but some jagged seam between. By the second week, it was a vigil. I'd sit on the porch, rifle across my lap, beer forgotten, the night a suffocating shroud. The rumble grew into a presence. Watching, waiting, its weight pressing against my skull. I'd strain to see it, imagining long limbs brushing the trees, pale flesh glinting in shadow, a maw poised to snap. Sleep fled. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves painted at inches from the walls, claws testing the logs, eyes boring through the dark. Dawn broke, and I'd scour the perimeter. Nothing, always nothing. The forest silence a taunt. Marty, a trapper 3 valleys over, was my lifeline. A grizzled man, skin like cracked leather, eyes dulled by whiskey but sharp with woodlore. I hiked to his shack, the trail winding through roots and rock, breath fogging in the crisp air, and poured out my tale. Sounds that didn't fit, a feeling of being hunted. He didn't laugh, didn't blink, just fixed me with a gaze that cut through the morning haze. Be careful, Owen. If you see anything that ain't natural, walk away fast. Natural? The word hung like a stone, unexplained. He thrust rusted bear traps into my hands. Jaws dulled but cruel, and sent me back, his silence heavier than his words. I set the traps, steel glinting in the dusk, a jagged ring around the cabin, north, south, east, west. Each snap of their springs a prayer against the night. 2 days passed, the rumble unrelenting, a heartbeat in the dark, but the traps yawned empty. The 5th night broke me. At 11, a rustling pricked the silence, soft, then sharp, followed by a crash that shook the earth. The woodpile out back toppled like a felled giant, logs thudding into the dirt. I seized the rifle, flashlight in my other hand, and stepped into the night, the beam slicing through fog that clung like damp wool. Scattered logs sprawled in the clearing, but the light caught something else. 30 yards out, a figure stood, man-sized, hunched, its limbs bony and too long, pale skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame, head tilted as if scenting me. No face resolved, just a grotesque, animal slant, a shadow of wrongness. My finger twitched on the trigger. It turned and darted, unnaturally fast, the trees swallowing it whole. I chased it, stupid, reckless, heart hammering, boots pounding earth, flashlight beam jerking wildly. A mile in, the trail vanished. No tracks, no broken branches, just my ragged breath and the blood rushing in my ears. Then behind me, a rustle, a thud. I spun, and it barreled into me, claws sinking into my shoulders, rifle torn from my grip. Up close, it was a nightmare, wiry, skeletal, its face a featureless void, mouth gaping not to roar but to taste, a slow deliberation of my fate. Pain seared. I thrashed, grabbed a rock, and smashed its skull, the crack wet and hollow. It reeled. I scrambled free and ran, lungs burning, not stopping until the cabin's faint glow pierced the dark. Doors locked, windows barred, furniture piled against the entrances. Cot, table, chair. I sat, rifle trained on the door, blood trickling down my arms, until dawn's gray light crept through the cracks. Marty arrived at first light, his call cautious, boots crunching frost. He saw my torn shirt, the claw marks, for gashes, deep and ragged, and nodded. Saw it, didn't you? I did. He muttered of an old legend, a deep woods thing older than men, feeding on isolation, fear, maybe worse. They don't come close unless they're hungry or desperate. It's got you now. His words sank like lead, a truth I couldn't unhear. A week of dread followed, days pacing the cabin, nights clutching the rifle, the forest a silent judge. Marty stayed 2 nights, his presence a frail shield, but left for his traps, leaving ammo and a warning. See it again, shoot to kill. The 5th night, a frantic pounding shattered the quiet. Not deliberate, but desperate, a plea in the dark. I shouted, rifle ready. No answer came. Opening the door, a crack revealed Harris. Bloodied, gasping, gashes down his arm, eyes wild with terror. A hiker, he'd been documenting wildlife when it attacked his camp. Killed his friend, left him fleeing through the night. We patched him up. Rags and whiskey for bandages. His story spilling in jagged bursts. 3 nights of circling sounds, then claws and screams, a friend torn apart. We took turns watching, a tense vigil as it returned, circling, scratching the walls, testing the logs with deliberate scrapes. Harris flinched at every creak, his nerves a frayed wire. I held steady, rifle cocked. Dawn drove it back, but it left a gift. Harris's friend's jacket, torn and blood-soaked, draped across the porch like a hunter's trophy. We buried it out back, stones marking the spot, a silent vow to end it. The next night, we baited it. Camp scraps strewn beyond the traps, rifles loaded, resolve steeled. Midnight brought it, fast, lunging for the bait, a blur of pale flesh and claws. Harris fired, hitting its chest. It staggered, black fluid seeping. I aimed for its head, the shriek a blade through my skull as it fell. We approached, its twitching form grotesque, skeletal, quill-like bristles along its spine, claws glinting in the lantern's glow. Another shot stilled it. We burned it, the stench a rancid cloud choking the air. Ash and charred bones remained by morning, a pyre of our survival. Harris left, vowing to report it, though we knew no one would believe. Marty saw the burn site, nodded. Something's best left alone. I stayed years more, traps set, rifle near, the forest silent, but its whispers lingered, a hollow promise of what might return. The Montana Verge. Brandon Kellogg, Montana Backwoods, 2006. Isolation was my bulwark, a fortress raised against the world's relentless din. My name is Brandon Kellogg, and in 2006, I carved a cabin from Montana's backwoods. A year of sweat and splinters, each log a testament to my escape from construction crews and city noise. 20 miles from the nearest town, the forest sprawled dense and unbroken, pines towering like sentinels. There sent a sharp tang in the cool air. No screens flickered, no voices chattered. Just me, a shotgun, and a view that swallowed the horizon. The sky a vast canvas of blue and gold. I'd always been a solitary soul, weeks passing without a human shadow crossing my land. The quiet a companion I'd chosen over the bustle I'd left behind. August tore that solitude apart. It began with a glint of fabric near the tree line as I chopped wood, the axe's rhythm faltering mid-swing. Torn clothing lay strewn across the forest floor. Shredded shirts, a pant leg, scraps of flannel clawed into ruin. A bear's leavings, I reasoned, its hunger scattering a hiker's gear, but curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me closer. The trail deepened. Broken branches hung limp, bark gouged with jagged scars. A faint rot wafting on the breeze, sour and thick. Half a mile in, the source sprawled. A deer carcass, mangled beyond recognition. Not devoured but shredded with a precision that chilled me. Ribs splayed like cracked fingers, flesh torn in strips, the head twisted at an angle no predator would bother with. Killed for sport, not sustenance. The air reeked of decay, a coppery tang beneath it, and I retreated, shotgun slung over my shoulder, locking every door as night fell fast. A stillness descending thick enough to choke on. Midnight birthed a sound. A low rasping, hungry and deliberate, circling the cabin like a tide lapping at a shore. I sat in the dark, shotgun gripped tight, its barrel a cold lifeline against my thigh, listening as it prowled, slow, patient, a promise whispered in each scrape. The windows rattled faintly, the wind dead, the forest a tomb of silence beyond that rasp. I traced its path with my ears, north wall, east back to north, imagining claws testing the logs, a snout sniffing the air for my scent. Sleep was a stranger. I sat until dawn, the shotgun's weight a prayer against the dark. Morning revealed claw marks on the door, deep, wide, heavier than a wolf's, tracks stretching into the underbrush, large and oddly shaped, almost canine yet too deliberate, vanishing where the pines thickened. I drove to town, the sheriff's office a squat brick building smelling of coffee and dust. I reported it. Tracks, gouges, the deer. My voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He laughed, a dry bark, blaming my isolation. Woods'll play tricks on a man alone too long. I nodded, bought ammo, and returned, the forest silence a fragile truce. A week passed, the rasp absent, and I began to doubt. Maybe he was right, maybe it was all in my head, a shadow cast by too many nights alone. Then another trail appeared, clothing again, fresher, leading deep. Against reason, I followed, shotgun in hand, the forest closing around me like a fist. Broken branches marked the path, bark raked raw, the rot stronger now, a stench that coated my throat. A mile in, bones gleamed, human, picked clean, arranged in a crude spiral, ribs and femurs framing a skull facing east, its empty sockets watching the sunrise. My stomach lurched, ball sharp on my tongue. I turned back, heavy steps shadowing me. Deliberate, unhurried, a hunter's tread. At the cabin, the back door creaked. Unlocked, swinging wide despite my habits. It stood there, tall, lean, matted fur dripping rain, limbs too long, claws scraping the floor like knives on stone. Its mouth twisted, a jagged grin of teeth gleaming in the dim light, eyes glinting wetly, not animal but aware. I fired, the blast a thunderclap in the cabin's confines. It staggered, dark blood oozing thick and slow, lunging faster than its size allowed. Another shot hit its legs. It dropped, claws scrabbling, and I smashed a chair over its head, with splintering across its skull. I reloaded, breath ragged, but it vanished, blood smearing the floor, trailing out the door into the night. Dawn revealed a path of dark streaks ending abruptly 50 feet out. No body, no tracks, just silence. I called the sheriff. A deputy came, young and skeptical, finding nothing. No blood, no gouges, the cabin pristine. Washed away, he muttered, eyeing me like a man unhinged. I stayed a week, shotgun near, the forest a silent judge. Then I sold it, to some out-of-state fool, and fled, its gaze a weight I couldn't shed. It's still out there, stalking Montana's verge, waiting for the next solitary soul. The Alaskan Abyss. Trevor Braddock, Wrangell St. Elias National Park, Alaska, 2006. Quiet was my sanctuary, a shield against the corporate grind's relentless hum. My name is Trevor Braddock, and in 2006, I claimed a cabin in Alaska's Wrangell St. Elias National Park, 30 miles from the nearest settlement, a wilderness of snow-draped pines and jagged peaks, my new dominion. No survivalist by trade, I'd honed enough from weekend hikes, hunting with a rifle, fishing a braided creek, tending a vegetable patch that thrived under the endless summer sun. The cabin was rough, logs chinked with moss, a stove that roared against the cold, a single window framing a view of mountains clawing the sky, but it was mine, a refuge from city noise and boardroom lies. 2 years passed in peace, the forest's rhythm my pulse, wind howling through the passes, bears lumbering past. Their musk a faint warning I'd learned to heed with a rifle close. Winter changed everything. It began with thumps, deep, rhythmic, a mechanical pulse echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. I first heard it chopping wood one evening. The axe paused mid-air, my breath fogging in the dusk. Not an animal's shuffle, not the wind's whine. It was too regular, too heavy, a sound that didn't belong in a land without machines for miles. I wrote it off. Acoustics, a trick of the frozen air, and retreated inside, the stove's crackle a frail shield. A week later, footprints appeared. Five-toed, clawed, sinking deep into snow beyond a moose's weight, stretching into dense forest where visibility died. I followed, rifle slung, half a mile before they veered into shadow, the pines a wall of silence. Eddie, the grizzled storekeeper in town, laughed when I mentioned it. Big wolf, Trevor. His eyes didn't match the grin. I knew wolves, and these walked upright. Nights later, scratching woke me. Faint, then insistent, a claw tracing the cabin's edge. I grabbed the rifle, flashlight beam trembling as I stepped into the freezing night, snow reflecting moonlight in a pale glow. Nothing. No tracks, no beast. Just silence, heavy and watchful. Morning brought a rabbit nailed to my door. Skinned, gutted, entrails coiled in a perfect circle, blood frozen in crimson whirls. Precision, not savagery, something knew what it was doing. More signs followed. Mangled corpses littered the woods. Rabbits, foxes, a deer dangling 20 feet up, its antlers tangled in branches no predator could reach. Symbols appeared, crude slashes carved high in bark, their edges weeping sap. Mid-January, I was a wire stretched taut, every shadow a threat, every thump a summons. It came on a night of biting cold, the stove's fire my only light. The thumping returned, Closer, louder, shaking the floor. I killed the lamp, peered out and saw it. 7 feet of dark fur at the clearing's edge, limbs long and muscular, claws glinting like shale, face a twisted meld of human and crocodile, teeth jagged in a maw that gaped too wide. I fired into the air. It didn't flinch, bellowing a sound that vibrated through the earth. Deep, resonant, a challenge. Then it vanished, trees swallowing its bulk. I packed essentials, rifle, ammo, coat, and fled for town, snow crunching underfoot, tracks shadowing me. Fresher, closer, a hunter's stride matching mine. Relief flared as smoke rose ahead, but it soured. The settlement burned. The general store a smoldering ruin, Eddie's body torn apart, limbs scattered like broken twigs. Barricaded in a cabin, the thumping circled, rasping breaths fogging the air, claws testing the walls. Midnight brought the attack. Door splintered, wood flying, its bulk lunging. Shots hit shoulder and chest. It roared, swiping claws I dodged by inches. A machete swing bit its neck, blood dark and thick. It bellowed and fell. I ran, not waiting until ranger headlights pierced the night. They found scraps, bones, fur, calling it an unknown predator, some muttering of mutations, others of ancient things. I fled to the city, its noise a frail shield, but Alaska's abyss whispers still, of claws and twisted faces lurking in the snow. The Ontario Vale. Julian Kowalski, Algonquin Provincial Park, Ontario, 2009. Solitude was my birthright, a thread woven through a Polish lineage of loners. My grandfather fleeing war for Canada's wilds, my father carving quiet from the world's edges. My name is Julian Kowalski, and in 2009, I claimed a cabin on Algonquin Provincial Park's eastern fringe. 20 kilometers from roads, a sturdy relic of logs and stone amid ancient pines, their gnarled branches a canopy against the sky. No Wi-Fi, no cell hum, just a fishing rod, a rifle, and Amos Fletcher, a trapper neighbor with a face like weathered granite and eyes that saw too much. The cabin was old, its walls creaking with every gust, its stove a roaring beast against the cold. But it was mine, a retreat from Toronto's grind, a romantic duel with nature I dreamed of since boyhood. October brought a crack in that dream. Amos arrived unannounced one evening, his knock a sharp rap against the dusk. Wiry, 70. His stare cut through the dim light as I poured him a beer, the foam hissing in the tin mug. Something out there, Julian. Ain't right, he said, voice low, unease etching his weathered face. He wouldn't elaborate, just sipped and left, his words a splinter in my calm. Nights later, I heard it. A deep, rhythmic thudding echoing through the forest, mechanical yet alive, not bear nor wolf nor moose. I stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, the cool air biting my lungs, but the sound faded, leaving an oppressive silence. No crickets, no wind, just a void pressing against my ears. Morning revealed tracks. Large, deep, a hoof-claw hybrid sinking into the earth, circling the cabin before vanishing into shadow. Dead animals piled near. Rabbits, raccoons, a deer, mangled beyond predation, limbs twisted, guts splayed in patterns no beast would craft. The silence thickened, a weight I couldn't shake, as thuds grew closer. Nightly now, a heartbeat in the dark. Amos returned, rifle slung, grim. We find it or it finds us. I agreed, reluctant. Supplies packed, rifles loaded. We followed the tracks deep into the park, the forest darkening, pines older, their branches twisting into shapes that clawed the mind. A clearing held a stone shrine, moss-clad, half-buried, symbols pulsing in shadow, ancient and wrong. It emerged, 8 feet of coarse fur, wolf snout wide, claws gleaming, moving with unnatural grace. Amos fired, hitting its shoulder. It lunged, guttural and low. My shots slowed it, chest bleeding black. We ran, its pursuit a thunder of steps. A branch hurled shattering rock, wounding Amos's leg. Back at the cabin, I patched him, blood-soaking rags, his breath ragged, but we waited, rifles ready. Dawn passed silent. Amos insisted we end it. Armed with shotguns and his crude explosives, we returned. It waited by the shrine, eyes glinting with knowing fury. An explosion staggered it. Gunfire filled the air, smoke, blood, the acrid sting of powder. It fell, Amos's final shot silencing its howl. We burned it, flames licking its fur, the stench a rancid shroud. The shrine weakened it, Amos said, a guardian loosed by time. We sealed it with stones. He left me his journal, park secrets scrawled in shaky hand, and vanished north. I stayed a year, then fled. Bones found later hint its kin endure, veiled in Ontario's wilds. The Idaho Fringe. Daniel Carrion, Northern Idaho, 2021. Quiet was my balm. A divorce's bitter cure poured into the wild. My name is Daniel Carrion, and in 2021, I built a cabin in northern Idaho, 15 acres of pine and fir, 2 hours from town. A sanctuary of silence with no hum but my own. No electricity save a generator's growl, water from a hand pump, no internet. A selling point for a man weary of noise. Hunting and trapping filled my days, skills from a father long gone. The forest's bounty, my table's grace. That morning, crisp and cold, I set out to check traps miles out. Rifle slung, thermos steaming black coffee, breath fogging in the dawn. The trail was familiar. Deer tracks, bear scat, the usual dance of the wild, until a trap lay sprung, empty, no blood or fur. A second mirrored it. A third was gone, chain snapped clean, the ground torn with claw marks. Wide, long, steel-tipped, no bear's work. The fourth vanished too, earth gouged deep, a silent violence in the frost. Unease coiled. I turned back, the forest mute. No birds, no wind, just my boots crunching snow. The cabin door gaped, torn off hinges, claw marks raking the frame. Inside, chaos, furniture overturned, food scattered, a foul rot choking the air. No beast's trace beyond the ruin. Night brought a figure, 7 feet, hunched, watching from the trees, moonlight glinting off matted fur. I stayed awake, rifle ready, its gaze a weight through the walls. Dawn revealed more gouges, deep, deliberate 10 feet from where I'd sat. I packed, drove out, but it paced me dark, weaving through pines, vanishing at the road. In town, a hunter's body surfaced, torn, half buried in snow, unexplained. I left Idaho, its fringe still holding that thing's silent hunt. From British Columbia's hollows to Idaho's fringe, the wild whispers, claw marks, blood trails, bones in silent patterns. Could you sleep, rifle trembling, as thuds echo beyond the walls? Would you stake your solitude in these depths, knowing what watches? The forbidden excavation unearths these nightmares, daring you to hear the hollow wild.